very lucky in this community, and as the cousin always says, we punch above our weight because there are some really great leaders in this community. And one of them is going to address us today. We have a dynamic duo in Hillel leadership, Yos and Leora Tarshish. And the reason I say that we are lucky is because though they are employed by Hillel and their mission from their professional mission is to serve the students, which they do above and beyond any expectation, their own way of being is that they see themselves as serving the Jewish people. And this community has been a really lucky recipient of their service because, they don't just do programming next door. They've each served on the board. They are currently on the board. Yos having just completed his term. They convene community events for the entire community, not just the students. And they are here, leading services, giving divrei Torah, chanting, laning, doing all of the heavy lifting. And not only that, but they're very learned people and have a lot of important and profound and worthwhile teaching to impart to our community. So we are very blessed to have both Leora and Yos among this Kingston community. Today Yos is going to address us, and we are very proud to invite him here to the Bima. Yos.
There's a tradition when you do something 3 times in a row, you have to do it every single year going forward. It's a tradition now. Don't know what you've started. And to be honest, when you asked me to speak again this Rosh Hashanah, it was hard to know what to say. We stand together at an inflection point in Jewish history. Almost 1 year since October 7th, and here we are. 101 hostages still languishing in Gaza. The war drags on with a second front now opened in the north. Tens of thousands of Israelis displaced from their homes, and the country's economy significantly impacted. We're not just witnessing war, we're witnessing the unraveling of a world that we thought that we knew. And here in the diaspora, the mask has slipped, and for many of us, it's a nightmare that we never thought that we'd face in our lifetimes, the resurgence of naked, unapologetic anti-Semitism on the streets, in classrooms, outside of our schools, on our campuses. And as Jews, fear has never been a stranger to us. We know what it is to live in turbulent times, and we know what it is and what it means to confront evil, and we know what it means to rise again and again and again in the face of devastation. And this year I felt the weight more profoundly than ever, because in June I visited kibbutz near Oz, the site of one of the worst massacres of October 7th. I was there with one of my now former Queen students, Jacob, and our tour guide was his cousin Netta, whose grandparents, Shlomo and Hanela Margalit, were founding members of the kibbutz and by a miracle survived the attack. I'll never forget that towards the end of my time, and if you haven't seen the footage that I recorded on that day and uploaded, I encourage you to find me and I'll share it with you. I'll never forget, though, one of the points, we enter the Chader Ochel of the community, the dining hall. And the dining hall served as a community center, and so that was where all the mailboxes were. And on every single mailbox, and you've got to imagine this is a community, about 400 people live there on a good day. So there's not many mailboxes, and every single mailbox there are stickers all over the mailboxes, and the stickers declare whether somebody was a hostage, whether somebody was killed, or whether somebody was returned from that particular home. And when we went to Jacob, Netta showed us his grandparents' letterbox. And you've got to imagine this kind of a wall of letterboxes, and there are letterboxes there, and there are no stickers on it. And above them, below them, side by side, and diagonally in every single direction, there are stickers. So to understand the miracle that it was that they survived, you saw it visibly there. Nir Oz is one of those places that when you stand there, you feel the echoes of history beneath your feet. It was established as part of Israel's early pioneering efforts, and its people have always been resilient. Sitting in the shadow of Gaza, the community has dealt with constant rocket attacks for 20 years. The fence at Nir Oz was supposed to be state of the art. If you touched it, no matter where you touched it, they knew, and supposedly within 20 minutes, somebody was supposed to be there. But when the sirens first sounded at 6:30 a.m., the community had no idea what was in store for them. For October 7th would shatter not only their lives, but the fabric of their community. The first Hamas terrorists breached the fence at 7 a.m., but due to the disarray that the country's security apparatus found itself in that day, by the time the IDF finally arrived at 2:20 p.m., almost 7.5 hours later, Nir Oz had been devastated. Almost 180 of its 400 members had been murdered, kidnapped, or injured. As I walked through the kibbutz with Netta and Jacob, I was struck by the remnants of the violence that had taken place. Burned out homes stood as silent witnesses to the horror that unfolded. I stood in the doorway of the home of the Simantov family, where parents and their 3 young children were burned alive. Their home, a place that should have been filled with life, was reduced to ashes, a grotesque reminder of man's capacity for cruelty. I stood in the front of the home of Carmela Dan, whose granddaughter Noya had been spending the night, sleeping over. Noya's face became famous because of that picture of her dressed in a Harry Potter uniform. She was on the autistic spectrum. She loved Harry Potter. And she was thought to be kidnapped, but she wasn't. And she was found, and it was later realized that her and her grandmother had been killed on October 7th. And you realize at some points just how indiscriminate this was, just how little these people cared about the real humans that they were taking. At one point, we arrived at the most incredible cactus garden. Hundreds of cactuses, every type of cactus you can imagine, standing there. And Jacob, who had grown up, despite growing up in Toronto, had been 5 or 6 times throughout his life to Israel, and every time he'd spent time on Nir Oz, and this cactus garden had been one of his favorite places because it was really a magical place. I mean, cactuses sort of 12 foot high. And this cactus garden was part of the home of Oded Lifshitz, or Oded Yocheved Lifshitz. Oded Lifshitz, when he was taken, was 83 years old. He was a lifelong journalist and activist, a stalwart of the Israeli left. Oded Lifshitz is one of the Israeli journalists who was on the ground in Lebanon during the First Lebanon War, reporting on Sabra and Shatila. One of the darkest moments in Israeli history, one of the moments that Israelis are still grappling to understand today. And he is one of the people who broke that story. Somebody that most Palestinians would probably, really, if they thought about it, think of as a hero. And he was kidnapped and he is still held hostage in Gaza. And then there was the home of the Bibas family. Their laundry still sitting outside of their home, not done. Who among us remains unshocked that a 7-month-old baby like little Kafir was deemed an acceptable hostage to be taken into Gaza that day? A baby who should have been growing up surrounded by love and warmth instead became a pawn of a death cult in their war of terror. These are not just stories, these are the realities that shake you to your core. What struck me about that day was not just the horror, it was the resilience, though. After visiting the Pioneer Village, an area of the kibbutz where the original homes from the 1950s had stood, Jacob remarked to Netta how much he had loved that part of the kibbutz of Nir Oz and how sad he was to see it in its current state. Many of these homes, built out of wood, long used for storage or other needs of the kibbutz, had almost entirely been destroyed. And without missing a beat, Netta laughed, and I catch this whole piece on camera. Netta says, my grandfather always wanted to regenerate this area. He wanted to create some sort of museum to the origins of the kibbutz. But now, we just need to rebuild, and that's kind of easier. And that moment crystallized for me the resilience of the Israeli spirit. Here was a community that had lost so much, that had witnessed unspeakable evil, and yet they were already talking about rebuilding. They were already planning for the future. Netta's words were not just a casual remark, they were a profound statement of defiance, of hope, and of a commitment to life in the face of death. And this, I believe, is the essence of what it means to step up in difficult times. Because we are the generation that has to step up. We don't get to sit this one out. We can't wait for someone else to fix things. Every single person here today has something that they can give to our community. Not just financially, but with your time, with your energy, with your presence. In the fight for our future. We need warriors of spirit, of learning, of Jewish pride. Our congregation is going through a major seismic shift this year. We're losing our rabbi. And this change is going to be, as I say, seismic in effect. And while we know that this isn't truly goodbye, we're going to see you again. And while we wish you the best in your new pulpit, which we know, being in Ottawa, will enable you to speak on the national stage for our community in ways that we need right now. We need leaders to be doing that. And while we know that we will be ably helped by our interim rabbinic support, the loss of such a significant leader in our community is going to require many of us to step up into roles that we didn't know that we were ready for. More of us to lead Torah, read Torah, more of us to lead services, more of us to think about being here regularly to help make up a minyan, and a myriad of other leadership roles that the rabbi has held in this community beyond her leading of services. Although the challenges faced by our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael may seem unimaginable to most of us, it may shock you to know that this summer when I spent time there, more often than not, my Israeli friends shrugged off my concerns for their well-being and instead moved the conversation towards their concern for diaspora Jewry and the anti-Semitism that we've been facing and we've been experiencing. And I can't pretend to my friends that what we're living through is normal anymore. Sometimes it takes you growing up in the diaspora, making aliyah, and then returning to the diaspora to understand what it means. And it's taken me a number of years to realize this. I shared with my friends about my experience speaking in front of the federal government this summer, in front of the Justice and Human Rights Committee as part of their study into campus anti-Semitism. I shared with them what students had been dealing with here at Queen's this year. How 5 mezuzot had been removed from doorposts in residences. And I told them a second story. At the Queen's Residence Society's AGM this year, the ResSoc is the student government that represents around 6,000 students who live in Queen's residences. The AGM is where they elect their leadership, and a first-year Jewish student approached the mic, and she asked the candidates standing to lead the organization what they plan to do in their roles to support Jewish students. I don't even need to tell you that the answers that they gave were subpar, because the real answer to what the room felt to the question was the ripple of laughter that went through the room the moment the question was asked. How audacious somebody was to even ask that these people care about Jewish students. So it's all well and good for me to tell you that we need to step up, but how can I do that when the ground beneath us feels more unstable than ever? Maybe you feel like you don't know enough, that you're unqualified to speak up. And I'm here to tell you that that's your cue. As a community, we need to push past the insecurity that comes with lack of knowledge to lean in and learn more. When I arrived in this community, the rabbi asked me whether I read Torah. And I told her, well, I haven't laned Haftorah in 17 years, but if you really need me to. And now I find myself doing it every few weeks. And, if I hadn't received that push, I don't know whether I would have been doing that. We need to take the discomfort and use it as fuel, not as an excuse. Because here's the truth. Just like nobody waiting in the wings other than ourselves and Hashem to save the Jewish people, the majority of the people who will get our congregation through the next 12 months until we find a new rabbi, are in this room. We're it. It's easier to retreat when the going gets tough, but when the world is hostile. The rabbi spoke profoundly yesterday of the Jews throughout our history who have endured unimaginable trials in order to cling to the faith of our ancestors. And our ancestors didn't endure pogroms and exile and genocide. For us to be silent when the world is burning. We are the masters of our own destiny. We need to start acting like it. That's why we need to lean into the discomfort of this moment. This isn't a time to pull back, to stay inside, to protect ourselves from the ugliness of the world. As they say, this is the time to lean into that discomfort, to build new relationships outside our community, to challenge ignorance, to teach, because our sages teach. As we teach, we learn. And leaning in at this time is also about reminding ourselves of that Hillel quote I spoke about a couple of years ago on Rosh Hashanah. Because yes, of course, if I'm only for myself, who will be for me? But that quote is followed immediately by, if I'm only for myself, who am I? So when I invite you, and I do invite you, to think about the many conversations that I'm sure you've had with non-Jewish friends this year about what we've been facing, I also invite you to think about how many of us have asked ourselves how we can be better allies to others facing hate. I invite you to think about how you wish the world were standing up for you as a Jew. And then flip that question and ask how you're showing up for others. This moment demands more from us. More openness, more dialogue, more willingness to have the difficult conversations, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. We can't afford to live in a bubble anymore. But what are we stepping up and leaning in to do? I think the answer is clear. We need to pump up the volume in Jewish life. We need to stop making the metrics of our success as a community how safe we are, how financially stable we are as an institution. These are important things, and we have a lot to be proud of here in Kingston. But our primary metric of success needs to be how vibrant we are as a community. This is not the time to be quiet, for subtlety, for blending into the background. We need to get loud. We need to celebrate who we are unapologetically, in public, in the streets. We need to fill the air with the sounds of our prayers, our songs, our joy, our resilience. We have ceded too much space to those who hate us, and that ends now. We will not go silently into the night. We will not let the world tell us to be smaller, quieter, safer. We will show up in the public square with our Jewish pride on full display. It's not just about us. This is about the future generations who will look back and they will say they stood tall, they didn't shrink. And all of this has made me think more and more about the text that we read today in our Torah, the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. We all know the story. Abraham, commanded by God, takes his son Yitzchak to the mountain, prepared to sacrifice him. It's one of the most difficult stories in the Torah and one that has perplexed generations. There is something critical here for us to reflect on at this moment. The Akedah is not just about obedience or faith, though those are certainly elements. It's about sacrifice, about being willing to take the hardest burdens, to walk the path that no one else will. Abraham had to rise early, had to make the journey, knowing that the future was at stake. He had to step up even when the task seemed unimaginable. Like Abraham, we too are called upon to bear the weight of difficult times. And while we do not face a literal binding of Isaac, We are asked to step into the discomfort of our reality and to engage with the challenges before us. To step up not just for ourselves, but for our future, our children, and for their children. The Akedah story is about the ultimate responsibility we have to our legacy, our future, and each other. Anyone who has heard my Divrei Torah this past year knows that the inspiration that I have looked to more than any other have been the words of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory. He spoke often, as I now do as well myself, about the politics of hope. The idea that even in the darkest times, we never surrender to despair. In the view of Rabbi Sacks, hope is not a passive feeling, but it is an active commitment to be hopeful, not just to have hope. He taught that hope is what drives us to rebuild and to strive and to make the world better. It's the hope that drove Netta to laugh off this idea that just because these buildings were destroyed, that they wouldn't be rebuilt. And that's exactly what we need to do right now, a commitment to hope. Rabbi Sacks said, hope is the belief that together we can make the world better, that we can overcome any setbacks and heal the fractures in our world. And right now, the fractures in our world seem larger than ever. We look at Israel, the anti-Semitism on our streets, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed. But this is when the politics of hope become the most urgent. We must believe that we can heal, that we can build, that we can overcome. But that belief is not alone is not enough. We have to act. We must raise our voices. Let the world know, Hinenu, we are here, we are proud, and we will not shrink in the face of adversity. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov described the world as a very narrow bridge, and the important thing he said was not to be afraid. So as we enter this new year of 5785, I ask you to commit to this. Step up into the leadership roles that our community desperately needs. Lean into the discomfort and use it to build bridges, to learn and to grow. And pump up the volume of your Jewish pride. Let it fill the spaces where anti-Semitism tries to silence us. Because we are the people that need to act. We're that generation, and together we will build a future of hope, in resilience, in pride. L'Shana Tova, may it be a year of strength, courage, and the kind of hope that moves us to action. Amen.
Amen.